So I can't tell people what they should do. I can tell them what I've done, what other people have done, and how they've been successful. And out of the 100 or so things that I looked at, I found 10 that were like, all right, I can maybe do these. These 10 make sense to me. And then after about 3 to 6 months, 5 of those things I get bored of.
ADHD Rewired, episode 508. This is the podcast for those of us with really good intentions and a slightly wandering attention. I'm Eric Tivers. I'm a licensed clinical social worker by training and a coach by design. I'm your host, and I have ADHD. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community. We are wired for connection, and you are not alone. Go to ADHDrewired.com to learn how you can join us in our free and secret Facebook group. Get additional resources for every episode, including links to any resources we mention on today's show. You can support us on Patreon, sign up for our email newsletter. You can request podcast postcards to distribute to your clients and support groups. Learn all about our award-winning coaching and accountability groups. You can co-work with us in our Adult Study Hall virtual membership community. You can do all of these things by going to our website at ADHDrewired.com. We know that starting is the hardest part, so let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD Rewired. Today's guest is Edward Savio. Edward grew up in Connecticut, and after Howard University, he moved to Los Angeles to pursue screenwriting, where he became a 10-year overnight success. Savio's first novel, Idiots in the Machine, was picked up by Sony Pictures for the Academy Award-winning producers of Forrest Gump. I've heard of that movie before. After more deals with Sony and Disney and others, Savio shifted his focus toward writing novels so he could spend more time with his family. He wrote his first 3 novels in the home overlooking San Francisco Bay, where Danielle Steele wrote her first 2 breakout novels. He once nearly drove Val Kilmer off a cliff. Well, that's a first for a bio.
I did. I nearly drove Val off a cliff. Yep, absolutely.
All right, so you're a writer. I'm great, and it's so you're a writer. You have ADHD. You've done screenwriting. You wrote a musical. You were really into sports. So you've kind of done all the things.
Yeah. The thing about having people always say, well, how did you do what you do? How did you become successful as a writer? And there's a lot of ways that people have done it. For me, it was I didn't really have a plan B. And so I was just going to keep pounding on that door until it finally opened. And I made a little bit of money in that, 10-year overnight success period. Survived. Then I decided I was going to write a book. I'd written 18 screenplays and gotten money from producers. And I finally decided I was going to write a book, and no one cared. So they didn't give me any money. So I didn't have any money. And so I had to go work for talent agents. And we can get into this later because I think talent agents really helped me understand. It was one of the major things that helped me realize how to deal with my ADHD, because I didn't have the kind of things that exist now. We're continuing to grow on that. How do we understand ADHD? What does it mean? If people think, well, if you're not running around with your head cut off, you don't have ADHD. And by the way, I did. And one of my kids did. At 5 years old, we knew it instantly. And my other kid, we didn't realize until they were 15. And they presented completely differently.
Inattentive?
Yeah. And I think it was partly that they were smart enough to deal with things until things amped up in high school. Yeah. Puberty also changed things. Sort of hormones changed how they looked at the world. And then all of a sudden, these things that had been there all along that were completely different from our other kid presented as a problem. One of the things about having ADHD, for me, I have to have systems in place, right? And I use these systems a lot. But the most interesting thing is that I have to change up these systems because of my resistance to them, right? My resistance builds up and they have to be modified.
Is it the resistance, or is it like that you need novelty?
I get bored with them.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not supposed to say that, but yeah.
Uh,
Uh,
well, wait, you say you're not supposed to say that. Why? I think it's acknowledging the fact that our brains just don't do boredom well.
don't do routine. Don't do routine, right? So it's kind of like people who work out, right? So if you work out the same way every session, you're certainly going to get stronger, but you get to a certain level and then you plateau. And so you have to change it up. You have to confuse your muscles. And for me, I have to confuse my brain. I have to confuse my brain, right? I have to confuse my mind. So I've come up with different ways to do that, right? So for instance, like in the next 18 months, I have 3 books and possibly 4 books coming out. Now, have I literally written in the past 18 months 4 books? No, no. But it's really because for the past 5 or 6 years, I've been working on these books, developing them, right? Writing them. And that's how I deal with my focus issue. I move between projects. So sometimes there's a longer period between my projects. And then all of a sudden, here's this person who just puts out a ridiculous amount at once.
So how do you come back to a project if you've kind of put it away for a little while?
I am not an anal person, but when it comes to mapping a story, or at least the general outlines of what I'm doing, I play an anal person on television, right? I play one on TV, and I have everything mapped out so that not only while I'm moving between projects can I understand where I am or need to come back to, and I look at it with fresh eyes and sometimes add in incredible things that I never thought about it the first time or even the fifth time I looked at it. But what also happens is that within the story itself, even if I'm focused on the same script or book, because I've planned things out, and I don't always do this with my regular time, right? But because I plan things out, I can go skip ahead to page 100 of a screenplay or chapter 10 of a book and go write a sequence
Huh.
because it hits me, because I know approximately what's supposed to go there. So I don't have to do things linearly. And then the idea is it can be time consuming sometimes to go back and then go, well, where's the piece that's missing? But it's easier for me to do that than to go straight from A to B to C to D all the way to Z. I go A, C, F, Y, B, at times. All right.
There's there's a strategy that I help people with in my coaching groups. It's the idea of leaving yourself a trail of crumbs, where
Yep.
it's like before you stop working, write a little note to your future self. Tell yourself, what did you just do, and if you were going to work for a little while longer, what would you keep doing? So then when you come back to work on it, like, oh yeah, I did that. Okay, this is what I'm doing next. So is that kind of what you're doing, or is it a little bit
It
more?
is. It is. And, sometimes it's really easy, especially with voice recognition software. And now we can embed audio in a lot of the programs that I use. You can embed audio or a piece of audio in, say, um, my organization piece. And so I can leave myself a quick message like, I'm thinking about this. And because it's audio, it takes no time.
Nice.
It doesn't, I don't have to word it properly. I hear my intonation. There's a thing I did a video a while back, which was based on a video or based on something that happened to me when I was 16 years old. I was coming back from a date from this girl that was in a town like 35 minutes away. And I'm driving, it's 3 a.m. and I'm kind of warmed from the evening and it was kind of fun. We had a good time. It was great. We went out and met with some people. And I'm coming home and there was a DJ on the radio station. And the DJ said this thing. He said, I never said she stole my coat. And he said, I never said she stole my coat. 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 And so a couple of things happened. Number one, I realized right then that as a screenwriter, even at 16, I wanted to be a writer of movies, that people could misunderstand what I was saying, even though it was written and I was literally putting it in front of them. And the second corollary to that is that I learned that sometimes when I write myself notes, the words don't mean as much as how I said them.
Mm.
And so when I write myself notes, and even if I use transcription for my notes, I write right, of course. But when I'm just writing notes, I still keep the recordings so that later on I can go back and listen to them
Mm.
and go, what was I saying here? What did I mean? Because I didn't translate this right, or when it was being transcribed, it didn't make sense. So yeah, I leave breadcrumbs for myself. And what used to happen is kids were really hard on my career because I wanted to spend time with my kids and I didn't have the band. Well, I have problems like all of us do that have this with transition points, transitioning between one thing and another. I have to chunk all my work
That's
together.
probably one of my biggest ADHD struggles is transitioning.
Transitioning, like when I have to do a video, I do 10 of them, right? And because if I do one a week or one, every 2 days or whatever it's supposed to be, if I do those, it takes that day away. But what used to happen is my wife would take the kids on a Sunday for 4 or 5 hours and do something because I would hang with the kids during the week and all that, and we'd all do stuff. But like Sunday was my day to really get started on some stuff for the week for writing. And after 4 hours, she would come back, and I had just started writing.
Mm.
I had just maybe 45 minutes ago
Oh, it's so
started because
frustrating.
well, because the first 3 hours, 3+ hours was me looking at what I did a while ago, like you
Mhm.
said, trying to figure out where the hell I am and get myself into the mindset. And then I'm like, I'm ready to go. And then boom, everybody's back. And this is a problem I think everybody has, right? They can't transition. And so if they can chunk things together, it's why I think working with people, like, so let me get back to what I was saying about working with people, right? Like, because we started this before we even got on the air. We were talking about this, because I can't just focus on that one thing, even though the way I work, I think makes my books richer because I have a longer period of time to look at them. I'm going back. I'm having the same output as someone who's putting out one book a year in a way, but I'm having a longer period of time to think about that. But I think what's funny is that, as I developed my own process, right, I had to find a way to work beyond myself and within myself,
Mm.
right? And to emphasize my strengths and cover my weaknesses.
So when you say work beyond yourself, what do you mean?
I can't sit there and say, I'm unable to do this because of I have this issue. I don't want to try this thing because it's scary and I know that I'm not going to be able to do it. And I'm probably going to fail because I've failed 50 times before doing something like this. I've seen that with my kids, especially because they're younger and they don't have the successes. So when they see failure, like I used to do this thing where I'd finish a screenplay and I'd finish it and I'd be like, I'm never going to be able to write another screenplay again in my life. And about 6 weeks of moping around thinking about that, I pick up, the computer, I start writing notes. I'd be like, all right, here we go. And lo and behold, I'll have another screenplay in 6 months. And at the end of that, I'd be like, cannot write another
Never
screenplay.
again.
Can't write another screenplay. After about the sixth or seventh time that happened to me, my brain went, all right, this is the part where I think I can't do this. So because I had those successes, I'm like, okay, I might not be able to turn around and do another one right this minute, but I know that I'm going to be able. So instead of like freaking out, let me go do something else productive or enjoy myself. Like, let me go on vacation because I can't do anything for the next 6 weeks, quote unquote. Let me go do something interesting or that makes me grow. Let me try something new, right? My kids have incredible amounts of help. Like they're very privileged in that way. But what's interesting to me is that no matter how much help they have, and there's people who are privileged and not, right? And people can get the best help and people can just go to the library and pick up a book on this. But I think no matter how good or bad, or sorry, how good a coach is, the person has to eventually do it themselves. You can't do it for them. It doesn't matter how much help or how many words you hear. Eventually, at some point, they've got to find their own way.
I think that's so true. I think even when we think we just want someone to tell us the answer,
Yeah.
no, we don't. No, we don't. Because if we look at what actually works, it's the figuring it out, learning from failure, like discovering our own system, our own way, our own path. I wish it
Yeah,
wasn't always that painful and laborious, but it is.
it is. I always tell people about this about writing, and it's the same thing with ADHD. Or how do I manage it? How do I my writing process is ridiculous. I mean, it's a ridiculous process. I mean, if I showed you my system, I mean, I have a 65-inch television next to where I hook up my computers about 50% of the time that I'm working. And up on that 65-inch monitor and another 50-inch monitor and a regular 27-inch monitor, I have where I'm writing in this little area. And then because I get distracted, I have to put up every single thing that I need to look at so I don't have to go to the window
Mhm.
behind. Because if I go to the window behind
It's
on my
gone. It's
laptop,
over.
I'm gone. I'm gone for 30 minutes. I wake up and I go, well, I learned that interesting thing about boats, right? Or or I went to that deep dive into those Post-it notes I put up there, but I've totally missed the point of what I'm doing. So I can't tell people what they should do. I can tell them what I've done, what other people have done, and how they've been successful.
Mm.
And out of the 100 or so things that I looked at, I found 10 that were like, all right, I can maybe do these. These 10 make sense to me. And then after about 3 to 6 months, 5 of those things I get bored of.
And then, after 5 cycles of that, you can bring out the things you used to do because they're novel again.
Oh, they are brand new again. They are brand new. I have female friends of mine who always talk about this, and I always give them the same advice because, like, when we were all single, guys they would come around. They would come into their lives and sort of hit on them a little bit or whatever, and then talk to them, and then they'd go away for like 3 or 4 months, and then they'd come back and hit on them again, and they're like, "What is that?" And I'm like, "It's the thing." They were like, "Oh, that was interesting," and talking to somebody, and then they went on and they're like, "Oh, I need something new in my life," just talking to someone. And then now they're going to come back to you in 3 months. So don't go back to that type of person. But in ADHD tool and other things, this is good. Dating, not so much. Right?
Let's do this. I know, as we said, we both struggle with our transitions, but we are going to make a real quick transition to a break, and we will be right back.
We will.
Support for this podcast comes from our coaching community, and we're almost halfway through our fall season, which means our winter season will be creeping up soon, starting on January 11th of the new year. Learn more and get on our winter season interest list at coachingrewired.com. Whether you've heard about our coaching groups or if you're hearing about them for the first time, you might have some questions about our coaching program. Oh, and if you are new, welcome. Questions like, what's group coaching all about anyway? Are groups like this really a good idea for people with ADHD? Yes. And how can coaching help benefit me and my ADHD management? And we are going to answer all of those questions. But first things first, if you're on your phone or maybe at your computer, open up your calendar and go to Tuesday, November 14th. That's Tuesday, November 14th. Because that's when our next monthly live Q&A is for the podcast. And we're doing it at 10:30 a.m. Pacific, 1:30 p.m. Eastern. And add it to your calendar and set it to repeat every second Tuesday of the month. And what does that have to do with our coaching groups? Because this next week on Tuesday, November 14th, right after our monthly live Q&A, we'll be holding our winter registration kickoff event to get your coaching group questions answered. We'll help you start your pre-registration process to get signed up. For all things ADHD Rewired Coaching, go to coachingrewired.com. That's coachingrewired.com to get your name added to our winter interest list so you can get reminders about our winter kickoff event next week on Tuesday, November 14th, right after our monthly live Q&A. Start your new year by starting with you. And with other adults with ADHD, we just get it.
What I've accomplished in 10 weeks, I didn't do it alone. I did it with all of you. I did it with my A-team. It's one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it is the results so far. For me, I've been really positive in the sense that I do believe that I can live without fear.
My biggest takeaway was realizing my boundaries are incredibly misaligned and I haven't been living the life I want to live.
You realize that trying to find better tools isn't really just the only solution. It's finding a community, finding people, and finding support, and learning how to ask for help and learning how to give help better. I think that really helps make a difference.
The thing that I learned was I have a place in this world.
Everyone in the group who's talked about their issue, we all then become invested in wanting to see them grow, and by proxy, wanting to see ourselves grow.
If you're thinking about joining this group, do it. If you're stuck and you know you need that extra push to help reach your goals but don't know where to start here.
So if you're thinking about doing this group, go for it. Check out the podcast, talk to Eric or talk to people who are available. This is the place if you have ADHD to be.
Take that first step by going now to coachingrewired.com to get started and actually add it to your calendar for Tuesday, November 14th. To get your ADHD-related questions, join us for our live Q&A, and to get your coaching group questions, stay after the Q&A, and we'll be answering all of your questions about our next season of coaching and accountability groups. What are you waiting for? Come grow with us and get started at coachingrewired.com. That's coachingrewired.com. We hope to see you there. All right, we are back. And we're talking about some of the your writing process, the sort of the merry-go-round of systems that that come in and out of our lives every couple months. So much too, I think, is about, we could either look at something like that and say, oh, it's so frustrating. Every 3 to 6 months, I have to change my system. Or it's like, oh, every 6 months, I have to change my system.
Yeah. It's a built-in, what I call it's overhead, right? It's built-in overhead. People in business, they have overhead. They have to turn on the power, the air conditioning. They need to rent the building or the storefront. It's overhead. So for me in my business, the overhead is me figuring out what the new system is. So, a little bit. I have to budget that 8% of my time, over a year to figure out the new systems. And that's my heating and electricity. That's what I pay.
It's funny with calendars. I really try to maintain just my calendar is my calendar, or just like the calendar tool is the calendar tool. I try not to touch that.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
This is I even wrote a book about this. I literally wrote a book because we were talking again before we got on that when I was a starving writer, I worked for talent agents, and I figured out how they use other people's times, their assistants, to magnify themselves immensely. My producers and everybody in my life, they always say, Edward needs people. And so writers have editors, they have other people that help them amplify who they are. One of the things, right, when I went through this book and kind of the process of how you would deal with letting other people help you, was about setting goals and writing them down. And even though I've done this, and I think we have to continue, I've done this in my life numerous times, I don't do it enough because they terrify me. Mm. And so the calendar issue of, I find my kids dealing with this too. It's like when you have this big list of things to do, you think you can keep it in your head because if it's in your head, you're not as afraid of it. But when you see it, it becomes real. And so what are your ways of dealing with that?
Well, this is a multi-part question that I actually love. So let's see if I can hold on to all the parts to this. Part of this is developing a relationship with your calendar, right? And if you notice that every time I'm in the presence of calendar,
are you dating to marry, or is it just you're dating other people too?
It's well, I mean, it could be either or. But I think thinking about this in terms of a relationship, developing some codependence with your calendar is not a bad thing. And so if you want to get that new calendar, bring it to bed with you on the first date. That's fine, right? Like the first thing in the morning, whisper sweet nothings to it. Just open it up, kind of glance at it, stroke your fingers over that page, just so you're really processing what's going on today.
Yeah, I've started to do that actually, which is really good. For a long time, we'd all in the household here, we'd all start with Wordle, and I was like, this is really stupid. Not that people can't do that, and it's a shared experience and it's fun. But Now it's like, let me look at my reminders for the day. Let me just see where my list of things are. And then I can kind of like this morning when I looked and I was like, all right, well, first of all, because you sent it in Central Time, I was like, do I need to add, subtract? Hold on. Let me make sure that I'm going to be there not at 12:25 but or 2:20. But then I could see what I could do in the meantime. And like I spent some time working on a book that's coming out and making my final edits. And I also thought about what we were going to talk about. So I had time to do that. So tell me more about this.
In one of my coaching groups yesterday, one of the members brought up this idea of like, she's just very resistant to her calendar because it's like this list of just obligations. I was like, oh,
yeah.
What about your fun stuff? Like, is that going on your calendar? Because I absolutely encourage the fun stuff to go on the calendar.
You had Hannah Choi on
like
a couple of episodes ago, and I listened to that, and she said something that just made me like, I sat up and went, wait, I need to write this down, which was when she was saying something like, when she works with the kids and they're college kids, right? She makes sure that they prioritize and that they schedule in their parties and their socializing. So along with their school work, right? They don't feel guilty about being social, number one. And also they know that if they think they're going to go do some hard schoolwork on Friday and there's a party on Thursday, maybe reschedule that because you're not going to be fully in the zone and know that, right? And plan for that. I'm nowhere near being in college, but for me, I think creative people, and I'm sure everyone feels this way, but I know creative people feel absolutely guilty when we are not writing the thing we're writing right now.
I definitely think that there's an ADHD element to that. That's idea that if we are not actively engaging in goal-directed behavior, we feel guilty.
Yeah. And I think it's because we can't switch off at 5 p.m. like people. Like there's people who I know, really good friends of mine. They leave the office and they are done. They may even
are they neurotypical, these friends?
What's that?
Are these friends neurotypical?
They are. I mean, they are rather neurotypical. And, it's funny because we actually have had conversations about our career choices in life. And I have met amazing people. I've sold things to Academy Award winning producers. I've talked to the presidents of 3 or 4 studios just sitting in meetings with me. But when you average it all out, the amount of money I make is about the same as my friend who's an engineer who just plugged along, making $120,000 every year. He and we've made like the same amount of money. Like I've made like huge amounts of money and then nothing. And then huge amounts of money and then nothing. Right. And so, that is a monetary distinction or a monetary measure. What is it? A measuring tool. But I think in life, that's also the same thing about how people are who are ADHD. It doesn't really matter whether it's money or enjoyment. We tend to sometimes not have them smoothly throughout life. And part of finding, happiness and how you deal with both yourself and being neurodivergent is finding the place where you can be both happy and healthy and productive. And I'm going to say it again, happy. Because that's the goal is not to have 10 books with my name on it sitting in a library for 1,000 years. If we have books in 1,000 years, right? The point is I want to be happy with the people in my life. And I want to make people outside that I don't know laugh, cry based on what I write.
Now, there's a great book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying, where this social worker interviews people who are in their end of stage of life, last like 6 months working in hospice. And you know how many people said they wish they worked more?
Yeah, 0.
Right. None of them. None of them. When I'm working with people on sort of long-term planning, we talk about let's actually talk about our mortality. Because this is the one thing we all have in common. We are all going to die. And there's a chance that, maybe one of us it's going to happen sooner than it should.
Yep.
Right. I share, about my dad, who, when he was 49, had a brain aneurysm and had to have major brain surgery and has had significant disabilities as a result of that. I mean,
Yeah.
he survived the surgery and he's still alive, but he struggles. He struggles big time. And like, we don't
And
know.
that was young. That was young.
And we always think, oh, this happens to other people. It doesn't happen to us. It's like bullshit.
No, it's true.
If we live as if this could happen to us, but also live at the same time as if we're going to live long.
Right. You got to do, I lost my brother last year, younger brother, and same thing, which is that you just don't know. And one of the struggles that I think I have, and I think people in general who are in creative work, for me, almost anything that I can do that's outside and quote fun, what I do is as pleasurable as that. There are times when it's hard work, but I get the kind of endorphin rush that I get from playing sports, from doing interesting things. Like, I love the water. I love the beach. Every time, I lived near the beach in Los Angeles. When I go on vacation, I want to go to the water, and I don't want to sit down. I want to do things. I want to dive. I want to go scuba diving. I want to do something in the water, like body surf, anything. I get as much pleasure from writing as that. And so for me, that answer, right? Would you want to do more writing? Like, I would love to. Now, the only thing is I want to make sure that my writing does not overtake my ability to interact with people. I'm an extrovert in so many ways. And yet I have to, again, I have to play an introvert to be a writer. That's what I have to do. And
it's so funny. I'm so flipped with that. I'm very much of an introvert, but I have to, I say that I'm an extrovert introvert because I can be very outgoing. Right. Yep. But like, I need my alone time. I need my, let me work on a project. Let me play music. I need that time.
I do too.
Yeah.
Here's what I would say, Eric. I don't know, because I've only had a few times in my life, when I was younger and working at these talent agencies in general, a couple of times in my life have I had a type of job where I needed my alone time. Right. So I get so much alone time that I don't know. I think I'm probably more similar to you than I would think or I would describe, because I get so much of it that I don't need more. Like, other people, when they work and they're like, oh, I got 10 meetings today. I'm back to back. I need some alone time. I'm like, well, I was just been thinking about this chase scene. And I was like, well, I'm going to do this, or I'm trying to write an interesting, romantic, funny banter between two characters. And I just sat down and was like doodling and writing notes. And so for me, that's working. When I first came to Los Angeles, when I was starving, a friend of mine, her mom owned a pretty big, she was one of the founding partners of a pretty big advertising agency in Los Angeles. She'd done all these big accounts. I went and I interviewed with her because I needed money. And I said, I'm creative, I'm funny. And she looked at all my stuff and I put a proposal together and she's like, this is really great stuff. She goes, I have one question for you. She goes, in 5 years, if someone bought a screenplay of yours, would you still be sitting here? And I'm like, no, I wouldn't. Right? She's like, you're great, but I don't want to invest my time in that, because what you're investing your time in is something different. And so we were walking around and she was showing me the office, and there was this one guy and he had a basketball net in his office, and not like a little tiny Nerf basketball net, but it had 10-foot ceilings. And this thing was set to 9 feet. And he would literally and he had these wood things and panels on the floor that he would just bounce around. He was shooting. And I was like, what the F? Seriously, what is going on there? This is an office. All these people are walking around carrying paper, working. She goes, that guy over there. This is in the late 80s. She goes, that guy over there. He goes, if he has 3 good ideas a year, he earns his $500,000 salary. 3 good ideas a year. And I'm like, she's not. Maybe I do want this job, work for this job, right? Maybe I could do that. But that's true. But it's the same thing, right? For me, it's like, if I have a really good idea, that script is worth a lot of money. Now, I may only have 1 or 2 good ideas like that a year. And that's another thing that I think people need to understand with their ADHD, is that they need to hone those ideas that they have and understand that everything's not going to be perfect. There's going to be 3 or 5 things. The biggest surprising thing that I learned, that I continue to learn, is that some of the most famous books, Lord of the Rings, all these other books, they were either serialized or written as short stories first. Ender's Game is like this. Whereas we've been taught more recently where it's like, well, you got to write this book and you got to write the whole thing and the whole thing's got to come out of you one time and that's it. Otherwise, you're not going to be successful. I'm like, that's not the way things have happened.
Mm.
You know, these people built those stories into the amazing, crazy things. They didn't just come out that way. I dated somebody who literally, she said, you know, you haven't made it by 21. I mean, what kind of writer are you going to be if you haven't made it by 21?
Oh my gosh.
And I'm like, well, okay, number one, let's see all those great writers. And there were a lot of them, you know, in history, but also they died at 30, you know, so they were like, I'm middle-aged, I'm 19, you know, but it was a really weird, interesting thing that's how people look at stuff. They think stuff comes out of people 100% finished. It's a process.
It is a process. Part of our process is taking one more quick break, and then we will we'll be right back with Edward Savio. We will be right back. Ever find yourself drowning in a sea of laundry, piles of clothes everywhere, and just can't find the motivation to finish? Introducing Laundry Lift.
Before Laundry Lift, my clothes would sit in the laundry basket for days. But now, it's almost like they fold themselves.
Laundry Lift is your revolutionary laundry companion, turning a mundane chore into a delightful experience. From washing to folding, Laundry Lift has got your back.
Laundry Lift breaks it down for me. It sends me timed reminders, and the app shows me fun and quick folding techniques. I'm done before I know it.
But that's not all. Laundry Lift turns your laundry routine into a game. Earn points for every load washed and folded. And compete with friends.
With Laundry Lift, I'm actually excited to do my laundry. Who knew I'd be racing to beat my own high score?
So why let laundry be a drag? Elevate your laundry game with Laundry Lift, transforming chores into cheers. While this does sound fun, it is not real. But you know what is real? The support and connection you get right here at ADHD reWired. From the podcast to our coaching and accountability groups to our virtual co-working community, adultstudyhall.com, to our free and secret Facebook community, which you can apply to join at ADHDrewired.com/community. And of course, our wonderful Patreon community over at ADHDrewired.com/Patreon, where you can find extra perks and support this show. Otherwise, you can find it all at ADHDrewired.com. That's ADHDrewired.com. Now, back to the show. All right, we are back. One of the things I actually wanted to ask you about is, so clearly you love to write.
Yes.
So I've struggled with writing for much of my life. When I was in my undergrad, I experienced what I would, and I've talked about this before on the podcast, but I definitely had some writing trauma. I had to take a semester leave, and then I came back to school for a semester of not actually enrolled in school to work on the stuff that I got incompletes in. And I was given the worst due date someone with ADHD can ever get. And that's whenever you finish it, it's turned in.
Oh, yeah.
So about 8 hours a day for a semester to write a fucking 3-page paper.
That's crazy.
One of my challenges is, as I am writing, my thoughts are 10 thoughts ahead and I can't keep up with it.
I'm going to give you a technique.
Okay.
Because your thoughts are 10. This is my younger son is like this. 2 things happened. I learned how to type as quickly as I possibly could because I could type faster than I could write. Then I realized if I just walked around with first a mini cassette recorder and then a digital recorder and then finally either a phone or a digital recorder, I could blow out a ridiculous amount of notes and ideas, and then I could organize them. And I've gotten really good. At first, they were just kind of crazy. But this thing happened where, because I would be, I have used voice recognition software since 1992 or 3, since, when nobody
had to spend hours of training the program, right?
Oh, yeah. And people just didn't have this. Like, I'm a Mac person, and I had to buy a PC that would sit in the corner. And the only thing it did was I would just use it for voice recognition because that was the only tool that was really available. So what I would say is this, is that you, instead of trying to spend your time chiseling a stone, and, when we look at beautiful sculptures, one of the things I look at is I'm like, any single mistake and they're done, right? That nose right there, that nostril, if they go too far or whatever, there's no rewrite there. There's nothing. They have to go in a linear fashion, and they can go start from here or from there or whatever, and they can attack it from any different direction. But really, they are limited in what they can do. With people who have shotgun kind of ideas, or your brain is moving 3 to 5 times faster or more than you could ever type, you've got to use the tools of, voice recognition or transcription and get down these ideas as quickly as possible. And what will happen is, once you see the dump and then you try to organize it, you'll be like, oh man, Jesus, this is too hard. This is like so much stuff. I was here and then I was there. Then, instead of trying to do it on your computer, I do it on an iPad. I used to print out the stuff in Redline. You have to do it manually. Like, you have to use the highest level of our technology today, voice recognition and, transcription. Then you need to use the lowest level of our technology, which is, although I do the high-tech version of it, handwrite your notes on the piece of paper that has all of your text that you just spoke. And the reason why you need to do it by hand is because when you're doing it manually, analog, you can circle a spot and go, like, I'll put a number 1 next to a paragraph. And then if I have somewhere else a number 1 with so a circle and number 1, if I then go up and I put a square around a number 1, that's where that piece is going to go. And I take these pieces that are all over the place and I can move them like note cards. And so I never lose. I have way too much. I don't get the place where I have too little, which is what most people, and what I used to have. I see, it's always been easy to write for me. I had the same problem you did in doing certain things in school, because they weren't the things I wanted to write. And so now we have different tools, and I've talked to my kids about this. I'm like, even though you don't like it, you have an opinion about this. Tell me the opinion about this thing you need to write. Record yourself saying the opinion about that thing you are writing, and you will then write the thing. You have an opinion about this issue. You might not like writing that, but you have an opinion about what this means. Tell me your opinion, and then do it, play the game by putting it into the format that whatever needs to be done. An article online, something for school, whatever it is, take your opinion and reformat it. Put it into a screenplay.
I do like that the note card idea. I actually put together presentations that way. Like, that's usually how my first planning step is. I get a bunch of note cards, and then because then I can create this sort of the arc of the presentation and sort of see it that way, and then I put it together.
So you asked me what's going on in my life right now. One of the biggest things for me is I've just released a third in a series of 4 books for sci-fi. And then I'm turning around, and this month, at the end of this month, I'm releasing a book called The Velvet Sledgehammer, which is inappropriate. It's absolutely just balls to the wall. Like, people are like, the language in this sometimes is vulgar. I don't know if I feel comfortable with this.
Our audience will like it.
Totally. And it's so funny, because the book audience of my sci-fi is a little bit younger, but the audiobook version is a little bit older, just because people do that. And so I have a group of people who, about 800 people who have signed on for information. And out of those 800, probably 150 are really super fans. And they kind of contact me and talk to me about things. I send this out for some of them to look at in advance. And I was like, listen, I'm warning you. It's a trigger warning on here, right? It's raw. It's real. It's how people speak. And it's fucking funny, right? And they're like, let me see it. And I was like, what this is a book about a guy who's the best at what he does, which is argue. And it takes place in 1993. And he's negotiating the what would become the World Trade Organization. And you're like, okay, World Trade, that's funny stuff, right? Real. So funny. But meanwhile, he's in the midst of this negotiation. And there's a time clock, because the United States had a law at that time, which if this thing wasn't negotiated by a certain date, that then Congress would be able to go in and pick it apart. But if it was fixed and it was figured out before, all they could do was just rubber stamp it yes or no. They could either say yes or no. They could say no, but they couldn't go pick it apart. And I want to go argue with this point, this point, this point. So a guy in Indiana couldn't say, well, that broom factory is going to be affected. I need to have this changed. It's like, nope, up or down. But meanwhile, his girlfriend decides this is the time. This is the moment that they need to talk about getting married and having kids. And he's got to go through and argue with these people and argue with himself and find through his past all the reasons why he should not be a father, because he's had horrible, terrible models for him. Terrible models, terrible parenting models. So it goes through all of this stuff and about relationship and about love and sex and finding, the meaning and actually coming to terms with growing up. This 35-year-old guy finally coming to terms, even though he's the best in the world at what he does, even though he's the youngest person that's been on the cabinet. And so the character is like kind of based on obviously a lot of me, but I did get to speak to Mickey Cantor, who did negotiate the WTO for under Bill Clinton as the U.S. trade representative. He was a cabinet level position. And he and I spoke after I'd already mapped out most of the story. And I told him the story, and he's this really hilarious guy who's just from Texas. And he's just like, he grew up in the Northeast, but then moved to Texas. And so he's got like both of these things going on. And he told me some great stories, and I just popped them in. And there's one story that I've changed a tiny little bit, but it's where one of the negotiators is just like going to hold out and going to stop this whole thing because everybody has to agree with it or it doesn't get done. I love this story because anybody who reads it is going to know me a little bit too well. And I think throughout, without saying, it's been this as a person who deals with ADHD, it is rife with that person who thinks they understand. This person is a little bit less enlightened, perhaps, than I was at the same age. At least I hope I was a little bit more enlightened. But the difference is they think they understand the world because they can control so many things. And what they don't realize are the things that are underneath that they can't control. So it's sexy, it's funny, it's outrageous. And
it's called The Velvet Sledgehammer.
The Velvet Sledgehammer. Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to leave listeners with? And if you do have a little bit of extra time, I'd love to continue the conversation a little bit for our patrons. But is there anything that you would like to leave listeners with?
If you want to check out anything, just go to edwardsavio.com. You can look me up. Just look up Edward Savio, S as in Sam, A, V as in Victor, I-O. One of the interesting things that, I did look, when I first looked you up over the summer, it's like I could find you. It's always interesting because some of the people that I've looked up recently, they have names that are much more common. It's just harder to find out about them. And they're doing great things either professionally or creatively. But I feel bad. There's one guy with my name also in San Francisco who's a dentist. He does get a little bit of play on the web, but if you look, I'm the first 3 pages of the web. And I used to get phone calls because my phone used to be public, and I used to get phone calls for the dentist. And I'd be like, yeah, no, I'm the writer one.
Okay. Have you at least once played with the person on the phone?
So I did not do that for the dentist, but when I was growing up, our number at home was a transposition. The last 2 digits were transposed of the local movie theater. And me, especially being a person who is a movie buff, this tickled me to no end. And so people would call up. So what we would do to screw with people is we would tell them the wrong time, but we weren't assholes about it and tell them like afterwards. That would have been terrible, right? But we would be like, oh, the show's like 7:45. It would be like, yeah, it's at 7:00, it's at 7 o'clock or 6:45. And they'd end up showing up an hour or because it just got to be so annoying. It was like every single Friday, Saturday. It was just a million times. And this was, we didn't have like screening, on the phone.
Caller ID,
caller ID.
Could you imagine today answering a phone without a caller ID of knowing who it is?
90% of the time, like who picks up anything that they don't recognize? Like no one does. And it's going to go to voicemail. And the other thing that's always crazy is imagine not being able to reach somebody. Like I can't reach somebody. I went on a date one time in high school, and it was a really nice formal date. We took this person out to a really nice restaurant, and there were no ATMs. I didn't have a credit card because I was 17 years old, And I get there and I look at the menu and this was like one of those old school places, and they gave the woman a menu without prices. And so she ordered what she wanted. No idea that it was 3 times the price of everything else on the thing, which was fine, right? So I had to go and pretend to go to the bathroom, and I had to go get on a payphone, call my buddy who was not at home right then, and I had to get his mom on the phone and go, can you find him? I think he's out playing basketball over at next door. And I'm like, can you go get him and ask him to bring $40 and put it on the tire of my car on a rock put a rock on top of it. And so she must have thought I had the weakest bladder, because I had to keep going and checking, going to the bathroom and checking to see if he had gotten there, because we didn't have phones for him to tell me that it was there. So I ended up on the 3rd time it was there. And yeah, so anybody listening who grew up right now with cell phones in hand, honestly, you just don't get it.
Did you get a second date?
I did get a second date. And it was so funny, because later on I told her the story. Not at the moment, but I told her later. And she was laughing, and then she got embarrassed that she had spent so much. And I said, no, that's not the problem. I thought the thing was funny, right? This is a funny thing. I think it's always funny, like whenever I watch a television show where there's people doing something where they have an embarrassing moment, but they don't tell the person what's going on. And I didn't tell her at the moment because I was stupid, young, or whatever. But I always laugh now, because the funnier thing, if you really want to hit it off with a person of the opposite sex, or a person who you're interested in, tell them the truth, because no one does. And it's just, you're gonna stand out because you're gonna tell them the truth.
The website again, edwardsavio.com. We will put the link in the show notes, and
pretty much everywhere on social media, Edward Savio as well.
Awesome. And if you're not supporting us on Patreon, you can do so and hear what else we're going to talk about. But for everyone else, thank you for listening. And here is the end. And that's all for this week. And a big thanks to Edward for taking time to chat with me today. If you want to get in touch or grab any of the resources mentioned in today's episode, head on over to ADHDrewired.com/podcast to find it all. Have any thoughts to share about the topics discussed in today's show? Check out our free Facebook community at ADHDrewired.com/community to apply. Then you can find other tips, tricks, and threads from other community members and from me and our other ADHD Rewired coaches. Then if you're a writer too and want some real-time accountability, or need some focus friends for things like cleaning, house projects, decluttering, creative work, checking in, and more, you can get started in our Adult Study Hall co-working community at adultstudyhall.com. It's free for the first week and only $19.99 a month after that. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast and want to support the work we're doing, consider becoming a patron over at ADHDrewired.com/Patreon, where you can get full, uninterrupted episodes with bonus content and announcements at the end for just $5 a month or more. That's ADHDrewired.com/Patreon to get ad-free episodes and to find all the tiers and perks. Go to the website, ADHDrewired.com, and click on the Patreon tab. Otherwise, you'll find everything ADHD Rewired at ADHDrewired.com. And thanks again to Edward for joining me this week. And thank you very much for sticking around all the way till the end. Until next time, remember, we can do hard things. You are not alone. You are awesome. And we will see you next